Hello, everyone. I'm Bandish, the founder of The Curious Mindset, a private community for technology leadership teams powered by 64 Tech, an IT solutions provider of hardware, cloud, and IT services. Although we're powered by 64 Tech, our core principle here is to always give more than we take. Rest assured, you won't be bombarded with any sales pitches. Please do follow our dedicated LinkedIn page to stay updated on how 64 Tech can assist you with any technology challenges that you may face, or if you're looking to shake things up with your current IT suppliers. Now, while 64 Tech provides technology solutions, some of the biggest challenges tech leaders face are human challenges, not technical. As leaders, there's often pressure to appear all-knowing, which makes it hard to admit what we don't know or ask questions that allow us all to be vulnerable. The Curious Mindset was created to help us build the essential people and leadership skills we didn't know we needed. This community grew out of my own experience and desire to help others overcome the challenges that I faced when I became a leader. I know firsthand how isolating leadership can be, and our North Star here is that no one leads alone. At 64 Tech, the mantra is together we grow, and the Curious Mindset is how we can make that happen. This is a safe space for us to learn, to share, and to become more confident as technology leaders. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our host, Mr. Andy McMenemy, our technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our very special guest, Christopher Cravens.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of TCM. I am so delighted to be introducing our guest today. We've had a lovely conversation in the lead up to today's session and just before we came live on air. But first of all, thank you so much, Bandish, for your generosity, in sponsoring the whole of the TCM organization through your decision to divert, the money available for you to market 64 Tech into creating this wonderful community where no one leads alone. And we've been discussing the theme of this quarter, which is tech leaders with human challenges. And at the end of last session, I spoke about, when we start to look forward with a bit of vision for next year, how do we come alive in 25? But not only come alive in 25, how do we thrive in 25? And guys, I can't give you a better guest than Chris Cravens to help us understand what it looks like to craft a vision, what it looks like then to put that into a strategy and absolutely start delivering on it. Chris, welcome to the TCM community.
Thanks, Andy. Glad to be here.
So take us through your journey, Chris. Give us an understanding of, how did you craft a vision for yourself, first of all, from an aspiring position of looking at where you wanted to go and then actually getting yourself there?
Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. Great lead in. So like a quick overview background, I've been in tech for almost 30 years at this point in Silicon Valley. I started off, actually, tech was not my first career. I was initially a professional musician. I played electric guitar. You can't tell with the blur, but I've got a couple of my guitars on the wall behind me. So I gave that a run for a while, and obviously I'm not a rock star, so that didn't totally work, and I needed to pivot. And I had this kind of chewing feeling in the back of my mind that I needed to go faster, that I wasn't that I kind of had to catch up on my career because I was starting in my late 20s, where a lot of other people had started in their early 20s. I had started doing project management work as a consultant. I was doing digital projects and quickly started doing kind of turnarounds. And I came to this realization one day that when I was picking a project to do, that the things that were really scary and really hard, there were fewer people who wanted to do those. So they would probably pay more by the laws of supply and demand. And that at the end of that, if it's a really hard thing, yes, I'm going to work harder, but I'll have more marketable skills and I'll be more valuable and be able to bill more on the other side of it, which as a consultant was very important to me to continue to figure out how to escalate income. So that kind of became my mantra for that first third of my tech career was, find the thing that's the scariest and go do that. And because on the other side of it, there's definitely some goodness to be had.
Mhm.
And that was what kind of led me eventually into leadership, as I just tried to do bigger and bigger things and scarier things. And they tended to naturally lead towards, well, first turnaround work and things that were kind of broken, and here, take a broken thing and make it work. And I did that with projects and programs first, and then I started doing it with teams. And then I started growing teams from scratch.
Mhm.
And that was where it really took off, was, doing
Thanks
some
for this.
startups and fun things like that.
And I love the ethos that you shared with me earlier, Chris, where you said, some of these jobs are very kind of short term. They may not be there long term. And therefore, this is an
Yeah.
opportunity to build credentials that, make you more sort of valuable, I guess, going forward. So, you had that
Yeah.
ethos of making your people more valuable.
Yes, that is a core tenet for my leadership philosophy is, realistically, especially in Silicon Valley and any kind of startups, right? So if you look at, especially the Valley, average tenure is around 18 months. So people don't stay in jobs very long, right? They go to do new things. But even if, people stay in the job for, a longer period of time, unless we're all retiring next, there's going to be another one. So if there's going to be another one, why not be in a better position when you're going to look for that one? So I took that same kind of philosophy and the things that I did in my own career, and I have applied that to my teams for a long time. And the kind of deal that I make with employees as they come in is, your responsibility to me is you're going to fulfill your job. My responsibility to you is I'm going to make you better at the things that you do, and I'm going to make you more valuable on your way out of here. I don't want to see people leave ever, but when they do, I want them to be able to command a higher rate and be in a better position within the market.
Which hopefully, I guess, should get you great commitment and great buy-in, because they feel that you've got their back, right?
It does. It does. I mean, and it's like, it's not universal, right? Everybody is different. But there are definitely people that I've been connected with beyond our time working together. And there are several people that I continue to coach today who haven't worked for me in 10 years plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that
all kind of part of the fun.
Yeah, but that's testimony to you as a leader, Chris. That's testimony to how well they feel connected to you, and the fact that they still value what you can share with them, and the insights and the wisdom to help them grow further. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's really rewarding for me to get to do that. There's one of the guys that I've worked with for years. I hired him 11 years ago, and we haven't worked together in about 9 years. But we've continued to be friends through that. We're now, we worked together for 2 years. We've known each other for 10, right? So 80% of that time we have not been working together, and we still talk regularly about work, about tech leadership, about how to coach employees. Well, so he's actually in the middle of a transition period. He just landed and just signed last night a new C-level technology role with an emerging brand that is huge in the US. And it's really fun to, and this is somebody that came to my organization as a manager, senior manager level. And 10 years later, he's a chief information officer. And this is his second C-level role. It's like, it's really fun to get to work with people and see the impact that has on their careers. And then see the impact that they have on the companies that they choose to participate with.
That sits really well with our ethos, of no one leads alone, and together we all win. And that's how we're looking at the year. How do we, as I said, come alive in 25, but not just come alive? How do we thrive? How do we take this community and have a vision for it? And I know you're going to talk to us about a bit more about vision, but the vision for where we've got the potential to go. There's two great questions, Chris, I like to ask, and I'll share them with you. Is when we look at the current reality, is how does it get better than this? And then the next question is, what else is possible? And I think that opens up the brain's curiosity, and it certainly leads to establishing some kind of vision for what the future looks like. So how do you approach vision?
That's a great question. So for me, kind of, you talked about like the leadership challenges, right? So for me, the thing that was always pretty straightforward that I could come up with was the vision. Like I could for whatever reason, the way that my brain is wired and my particular brand of neurodivergence, I'm really good at imagining that future state. When it comes to talking about it and sharing all of the richness of the thing that I see in my head of what that is going to look like, that, however, I have generally not been that great at. And I've had to develop that skill over the years of, how do I bring people along? Because I just kind of assumed for, forever, like, well, I see it in my head. I'm just an average guy. Why doesn't everybody see it in their head? And my head's obviously a little bit thicker because it can't get out, right? So there's this thing of, it's incumbent upon you as the person who has the vision to define it well enough and document it well enough that you can share it with others and you can bring them along for that journey. So whether you're leading a team in scaling, whether you're transforming a business process, any kind of a significant change, you need to have a very compelling vision, right? But you also need to be able to figure out how to break that down and make it real. There's a tool that I picked up along the way. A couple of friends of mine that I've met through the journey, Shannon Lucas and Tracy Lovejoy, wrote a book called Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, which I totally related to. And this book, like the concept around it is the idea of a human being as a catalyst, right? And that there's a type of worker that they brand a catalyst, who is an individual with an innate desire or ability or even a need to drive a lot of change. And they, a catalyst also takes in a lot of information, sees the infinite possibilities of what could be done, and is even compelled into moving into action and really can't help themselves but try and bring about that change. So I can relate to that. Like, that feels very close to me. So I've become good friends with these two ladies. So there's an advantage there, right? But the challenge is, if you can't bring everyone else along, you're the only one out there and you're going to fail. Like, to your point, like, we can't lead alone. You have to bring people along. So to make that real, there's this exercise. I think it's about page 121 or so in the book. It's in the latter part of it in the tools to enable success area. And they make this thing called an action map. So you can imagine, a chart, right, where you draw out your current state in the lower left-hand corner, and you map out your future state in the upper right-hand corner. And this is very much a linear journey from one to the next. And then you start to decompose your vision and start to get really specific about what are the characteristics of this vision? What are the things that are true in this world that you've created of the solution? And how do you start to break those down and draw lines backwards to your current state? Right. So instead of starting from where you are, and this is, a common thing in project management planning, everybody talks about, start with the end in mind. Absolutely start with the end in mind, as clear and crystal clear as you could make it. And then you start to draw those lines back and you identify, like, what are the through points along the way? And those become your milestones, the things, the kind of state changes that you want to deliver, the capabilities that you want to deliver. So each kind of major component then has a thread and through line and objectives. And now, okay, guess what? You've made a roadmap for each of those areas. As you continue to refine that, that gives you a good sense of what are the things you need to do along the way to actually make this real. And then that can become a strong basis for that communication and how you share that vision of having poked your head through the curtain and seen the future. You can now come back and share that information with everybody else to get them aligned, right? It's not enough to just share it. You've actually got to get people bought in. Yeah. And the more that you can put kind of detail around that vision, and the more that you can identify where the value levers are, where the benefits are for the individuals that you're talking to, like that, I think makes it so much more real. It's one thing to say, like, I've got this great vision of the future, and if you've got, a lot of trust in the environment and people believe in you, they'll come along, right? Whether they understand it or not, they'll come along. But you can't always count on that.
And I think
it's a weak bond. You know, if you think of chemistry, like there's strong bonds and weak bonds. That's kind of a weak bond. Strong bond is they're not coming along because of some personal influence or because they trust you. Maybe they start with that, but they're coming along because you've told a compelling story.
Yeah.
You know, and here's how life is going to be better in the future, right? And here's how we're going to get to the future. We're going to do these things in this order to get to this future, and it will measure the success in this way. It becomes very powerful.
I think that's lovely because you're kind of inspiring a shared vision, aren't you? You're saying this is what I see in the future, and guess what, guys? If you're inclined to come along with that journey, this is what's in it for you. Because I guess we're all selfish. What's in it for me if I get onto this journey? You know, what am I going to learn? What am I going to develop? How am I going to become more valuable? And I loved your leadership ethos of, you know, making my team more valuable, because by definition the project will have a finite lifespan. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But it also, like, it gets the shared vision thing, I think, is really important, right? If you look at, like, you know, there's a lot of startup people who are on the call, I'm sure. And the thing that I've noticed in startups, right, that early stage of the company, it's the shared vision of the future state is the thing that is so compelling and so interesting. And that's why people are there. They're there because they believe in the vision, they believe in the thing that they're trying to build. And that becomes this all important existential kind of requirement when you're in a startup. Is you have to build it to stay in business, right? It's different when you're in a more mature company. Yes, there's some level of existential threat, but everybody's on their own objectives and their own missions. But when you're like in that small group and your objective is binary, you know, release the thing, get to market, you know, there's a kind of a different thing. So creating that sense of shared vision, I think, is of the utmost importance for any leader. And it's one of those things that we all need to work on. And it works internally within the team, and it also works externally. You know, when you're looking at how do you broadcast this information out, because, well, it's not enough to just go and do the things. You also actually kind of technically have to tell the rest of the management team what you're doing. You know, you have to be able to communicate with your executive team. Sometimes, you know, depending on your level, you're communicating with your investors or your board. You're communicating with external partners. You know, it's like taking people through state change. It's not just a single person thing, right? There's networks and networks of humans who are involved in all of these things. And as the leader, you're the one who's responsible for ensuring that everybody understands what's happening.
And that's the point, I guess. We are tech leaders with human challenges in that scenario, which is exactly where we are in the ethos of this campaign we've been running through the quarter, of bringing that into the room, you know, bringing the elephant into the room, because that's exactly what's going on. But I think what resonated with me, Chris, was when you draw the vision and you start to put the lines back and you put some meat on the bones. Well, now you're starting to create a strategy that people can buy into and believe in, because now they can see a mechanism of achievement.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And so another thing that goes well with this also is, if you think about that, like bringing people along, and this kind of segues into the next bit that I wanted to talk about, which is, you know, you have your vision. Okay, great. You're going to go execute it now. How do you do this thing of managing up and out? Right now you have it. You're going to. So obviously you've got to tell, you know, your superiors what's happening, right? And this managing up and out is this thing of, like, how do you let everybody know what it is you're signed up for? What are you going to deliver? What's the impact of it? And make sure that they're bought off, right? So it's all about your prioritization and alignment. So now you've got this vision, right? I think the first thing to go do is make sure that you can define out of the vision clear goals and success measures, right? For yourself, for your team, for the program, for the organization. So use the map, right? So if you kind of draw this map, and then, you know, you've got your future state up in the corner, to draw timelines within there. So then that gives you an idea of, okay, what do I think I want to accomplish in year 1, year 2, year 3, right? Create a PowerPoint, you know, a document, something so you can share with people, right? Because written word is incredibly important here, and documentation is important. Having some kind of a leave behind that people can really absorb and react to. But then go out on a socialization tour, with the other managers in your organization. And, you know, it's almost like shop the vision around. So there's this thing that I picked up along the way, this kind of concentric circles of trust type model, right? And when you think about your organization, you can think about the people who are like kind of green, yellow, red. Like, how do they feel about you? How do they feel about your team? Are they supporters? Are they neutral? Or are they detractors? Right? You start with your supporters and you go to them and you say, Andy, here's my plan for 2025. Here's how we're going to thrive, right? I want to get your buy-in on this. I get your buy-in on it. Then I go to Bandish. Bandish, just workshop this with Andy. Got his feedback on here. I'd like your feedback as well. So you keep doing this and you kind of do these rounds. First, you do all the folks that are really supportive. You integrate their feedback. You adjust your vision. You recirculate it with them to confirm, like, hey, here's the feedback I heard from you. Here's where it's integrated. What do you think now? Right? You get them bought off. Then you move to the yellow. You can kind of move out in those concentric circles and the people that are a little more dangerous. You do the same thing again. That circle will be larger just by definition. So you do the same kind of process. You integrate feedback. You recirculate back to the folks. You adjust your vision. You make it more compelling. Now you go to the last people, and they're the hardest ones. It's not the largest group by any stretch. The kind of neutrals are the big group. There's always this small group of kind of reds, of folks that, for whatever reason, you're just not vibing, right? You're not connecting. And that can be really difficult. There's always, you know, this kind of advice of, oh, go get a beer with the person. Don't do that. I mean, maybe go do that, but that's not going to fix anything. The real thing is have these conversations with them, share with them the vision that you have for the organization, right? So this is the real importance of this kind of concentric circle model. So now you've got this thing that's got, you know, fingerprints from like 80% of the management team on it. And you go to this remaining 20% and you're like, hey, here's the thing that we've all been workshopping. And I've got buy-in from all these folks on this, and I'd really like your take. You know, but at that point, you have a lot of momentum behind that vision. So it's a good way to kind of help mitigate the risks around detractors and help show how you have built transparency, you've built alignment with the business, you're echoing the priorities and initiatives of the company and the things that you're doing. You have a clear line of sight to the company goals. It really adds a lot more value to that communication, as it shows where your team is now directly aligned to the objectives of the organization.
And I guess the more you've got the momentum moving you forward because of the early adopters, the early buy-ins, then you've got that kind of urgency and you've got the mass and everybody's talking in the positive. So I guess the late adopters or the detractors are still in the red zone. Are just they're either going to get on the bus or they're going to leave it off.
Yeah, they're either going to get on the bus or they're not, right? And that will be, you know, sometimes you get to this kind of like this breaking point of, are we going to do this thing or not? Right? It really helps. Like, if the thing is worth doing, like, you know, and if it's potentially a little controversial, this is really important to show that the organization has broad support for achieving this. And you'll find out, socializing also, if the thing that you want to do doesn't have broad support, you will find out before you get to your detractors, right? So you kind of manage your risk by thinking about, like, to whom do you expose your surface area, right? And to whom do you share the kind of stuff that's happening internally, right? And that's why the circles of trust are so important, because you can go to somebody who's, you know, like if you and I are close and we work together and I've got some totally out there idea and I come and I share it with you and you just look at me and say, Chris, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard and it's not going to work. Okay, great. That's all within the circle of trust. Great, no problem, we can move on. As opposed to if I take something that's just a half-baked idea that's not vetted and I go to someone who's a total detractor of mine, that could be a career-altering maneuver.
Yeah.
Possibly even what I'd like to call a resume-generating event. Right? So the idea is, you know, how do you navigate this safely? Avoid those things. Right? Those are bad. Avoid that, right? And communication is your friend here, and networking within the company, building these relationships is important, right? So along the way, to do that, you need to do things like set up regular one-on-ones, not just with your employees and with your skip levels, because I mean that all we need to all do, but regular one-on-ones with your partners, your peers, the people that you interact with, you know, the leadership team. If you have access, if you're at the level where you have access to your C levels, set up one-on-ones with them. Find out from them what the right cadence is, right? Don't just throw something on their calendar every week and think they're going to give you an hour, because people don't necessarily have that kind of time. But, you know, find something that works and then make it high value, right? Deliver regular updates on program status, successes, the impact of the things that you're doing, team performance, right? Think of that as a way to have those direct conversations with those individuals. And that's more like this opportunity also in those situations. You want to solicit the feedback. It's better to get into, especially any kind of negative feedback, in those one-to-one sessions. And then that leaves you the opportunity to make adjustments, right? And then you think about things like the big project governance, like if you have steering committee meetings or, you know, project readouts or things like that, where you've got a whole big group of people. If you've already had those one-on-one conversations and you know what the potential detractions are, you can adjust before you get into the big setting. Even if you're not able to successfully turn the boat on whatever the issue is before you get into that larger meeting, into the big meeting, and you're doing the status update and the executives are all there. If that person happens to call out and say like, hey, Andy, you know, we talked about this, that I don't like this thing. Say, well, you know, Andy, I do appreciate that. Thank you. We did talk about that. And here are the things we've taken. Here are the steps we've taken. And here's the changes so far. And here's what's next. Yeah. And it shows everyone else in the room that you are soliciting that feedback, that you are adjusting, that you are keeping the organization in mind and adjusting appropriately. And that, I think, meets this overall goal. Like, your goal as a leader is to build and maintain trust within the organization. Yeah. Right. To do that, you want to kind of think of it on the simple side of things as increase your predictability, reduce the surprises. Right. And to do that, you've got to be able to communicate early and often and demonstrate alignment back to what's happening within the company.
Sure. And I guess the more allies you gain as a result of that strategy, Chris, the easier it is then to start making those challenging decisions. And I imagine, you know, during the course of your journey, you know, I know you shared something with us before about decision fatigue, but, you know, you're just immensely involved in constantly, you know, problem solving.
Yes, constantly. Well, and the thing it does for you, like, again, it raises that level of trust. Which means your peers are going to give you more honest feedback. You know, they're not going to hide things. Hide is the wrong word. People will kind of couch things in a low trust kind of environment, and you get this filtered response to things. If you can bring the trust level up, those filters kind of come off, and you get a much higher fidelity response, which gives you just better intel to work off of when you're making adjustments, right? Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's just highly important to be able to do that. And I think the other thing that I didn't mention here that's really critical with it is, especially if you're a service organization that provides, you know, like IT is a service organization, some engineering organizations are service, right? If you have internal stakeholders and customers who are dependent upon you for their success, I think it's also incredibly important that your new work intake process, you know, requests to do something for some part of the organization, that's really well defined and transparent and clear. Make sure prioritization is extremely clear, and that there's a strong kind of prioritization rubric that you can apply so that you can keep clarity around what it is that you're going to do, but also what it is that you're not going to do.
Which I guess helps you to be able to, when you do make a commitment to do something, you're not going to disappoint them then by under-delivering.
Yeah, that's absolutely the worst thing you do. That's the easiest way to shoot yourself in the foot as a leader. And that's such a common thing too for new leaders. So for anyone who's starting out, there can be this kind of pressure not to say no. Like, you just need to do the thing. It's like, okay, well, yes and no. You need to accomplish as much kind of traction towards the overall goal and objectives as you can with the resources you have. But you also need to be able to tease out whether or not you really have enough resource, whether or not you have enough capacity in your team to do the thing. So there's like, everyone talks about, like, you've got to, be able to draw the line. You do. So almost to the level of, simply listing out all of your projects and determining, like, where does the funding run out? Where does the level of human resource run out? So to really be able to track that, you need to understand, what does it take to just keep the lights on and do the bare minimum within your business. And if you can start to tease out, like, there's this thing or a simple model that I use for it called the prioritization sandwich, right? Because we've all made a sandwich. This concept of corporate prioritization is really esoteric, right? But everybody's made a sandwich at some point in their life. So, like, the kind of bottom slice of the bread, the thing that you absolutely have to have, that's your keep the lights on, that's your compliance, that's your security basics, that's like the foundational thing, the existential threat kind of level stuff of, if we don't do these things, the business will shut down, the building will be dark, all the things will be off, and nobody gets paid. Generally a bad outcome, right? So the top piece of the bread, sometimes you only get the 2 pieces of bread, sometimes you only get the 1 piece of bread, is kind of grow the business, like that kind of in place growth and attainment of a little bit greater success. But the real meat in the sandwich is transformation. And in order to get to that, you have to have the right funding, the right prioritization, and enough resources. But if you can't define, what does it take to keep the lights on? What does it take to do, like, how do I do the bottom slice? How do I do the top slice? How do I do the middle slice? You've got to be able to map that out in a way that is then meaningful, so you can set expectation.
Which is managing your stakeholders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's just a real key to success, because if they have an idea in their head of what you're going to do that is different from the idea that you have, you've already lost. Because even if you deliver the thing that's in your head, you've not delivered what they're expecting.
Yeah. And I guess it's really important, because you've credibly developed the vision, and you've aligned people behind it, and you've got stakeholder buy-in. But I guess, the pressure that you're under to deliver on it at the increments you said you would deliver, I guess, can lead to a feeling of overwhelm. It can lead to a point of, if you don't put those barriers and those boundaries in place, then you're leaving yourself liable for burnout, aren't you?
100%. Yeah. And burnout is a tremendous problem in technology, not just technology. I think it's in other sectors as well, but for sure, in technology, this is a problem. And we see this, especially in IT and engineering organizations, because the pressure is very high. Right. So burnout in general, and these are US statistics, right? But just a couple of numbers. In 2018, 24% of working US adults reported feeling burned out, according to a Gallup poll. By 2020, that number went up to 76%.
Wow.
So in 2 years, we went from lower quartile to upper quartile. By February of 21, 89% of working adults worldwide said their work life was getting worse, and only 2% rated their well-being as being excellent, from an HBR study in 21. So people are stressed. The pandemic definitely put a lot of pressure on people, but I think also this continued acceleration of new innovation, more and more tools, more and more sprawl, more ways to do things, doesn't necessarily always result in more outcome, right? Because you still have to define what it is that you want to do and how that should look, right? So that segues well into, I think, like, the main causes of burnout to me. The number one thing, I think, is unclear expectations. And it's the job goals, but it's also your personal goals, right? Because there's really, like, back to the prioritization thing, in your personal life, there's only so many hours during the week that you're going to be awake. You know, even if you get up earlier, you don't sleep much, there's still only so much time that you have to do things, right? There's like, you're going to run out of things. So if you can't prioritize your work goals and your personal goals and use that to set expectations, that leads to disappointment. Similarly to what we were just talking about, where if your stakeholder has a different vision of success than you do, you may not be well aligned. If you've got a vision of success in your head for yourself that requires you to put 50 hours a week, dedicated time towards it, and you have 5, you are not going to achieve that vision.
Yeah.
Right. The other things I think that that stack up towards burnout, they're all just kind of human things, right? So dysfunctional workplace dynamics, you know, the kind of infighting or politics at work can be really difficult there and cause a lot of anxiety. Extremes of activity, unmanageable workload, unreasonable time pressure. I mean, talk about IT and engineering right there, right? This is what we do all day, all day, every day, is unreasonable time pressure. The lack of control, lack of social support, lack of support from your manager, and an imbalance in your work and life, right? If you're just really overwhelmed. And I mean, this is understandable, right? These are things that we know cause burnout.
These are human challenges.
Yeah. It's this thing of like, I don't know, there's this concept of a success penalty that I like very much. That there are just some times where you're being punished, not because you've done something wrong. Like, it's not hard because you've done something wrong. It's hard because you're onto something and you're getting traction. And the amount of work that's necessary to prosecute that opportunity is growing and has potentially outstripped your capacity. Right. So recognizing that and adapting to it and figuring out, okay, well, what do I actually want to do next now?
Yeah.
You know, that becomes pretty critical. And to do that, I think the first thing is acknowledge that kind of feeling of burnout. And even, you know, if you're in this state, we're like, well, I think I'm a little burned out, but I'm not super burned out. So maybe, you know, I'm not burned out. If you feel a little bit burned out, you're probably a little burned out.
Sure.
Just, you know, so acknowledging it, talk about it, find somebody that you can talk to. It doesn't, you know, I mean, therapist, counselor, great. Good friends, great. Untrusted coworker, very bad. Like, the dog is fantastic. Going for a walk is fantastic. Talk to the trees. I do it all the time. Like, find some kind of way to talk through those things, but also give yourself a little bit of permission to feel like shit during that moment.
Yeah.
And to feel those feelings and practice some self-compassion and self-care, and tell yourself, you know, it's okay and you're going to get through it.
You know, that's a really valid point, Chris. Just the simple act of going for a walk. In other words, you're not looking at a screen, you're not looking at 4 walls, you're looking at an ever-changing environment. The brain is designed for, you know, being fascinated by lots of different input and stimuli. And that's where the therapy EMDR came from, you know, desensitization and reprocessing, because as our brain was evolving, we were designed to be looking at lots of fascinating aspects, which evoked our curiosity. And lo and behold, you find the answer to your problem.
Yeah, I love EMDR. That stuff's so useful. It's magic. It's wild how it works.
So one of your points
is huge.
Sorry, Chris, one of your points for advocating mitigating burnout then, I guess, would be to take regular breaks and get some fresh air, right?
Take regular breaks, get fresh air, get some physical activity to the level that you're comfortable with, right? That is not a form of exercise, but to your point,
my screen's just frozen, so I do apologize if I'm stuck at my end.
It's
froze for me too.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, we're back again. We're back again.
And so, we're back. Yeah,
Chris, I'm very conscious that that you know, our audience will be firing questions left, right, and center into the chat. So I'd just like to thank you so much for that insight that you've shared with. I'd like to invite Steve to come forward, and perhaps maybe you'd be kind enough to field some of the questions that the audience are firing in.
I would love to.